Black Maid hid her pregnancy from her cold, wealthy boss months later. What he did shocked everyone. He made love to her on the Persian rug in front of his fireplace, slow and careful, like she was something precious. Afterward, he'd held her close, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Have you ever kept a secret that could change everything? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She stood in his marble foyer, holding termination papers in one hand and a positive pregnancy test in the other. But he would never see both. The Manhattan penthouse gleamed with winter light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, each surface polished to perfection, except for the shattered crystals scattered across Italian marble like diamonds of her destroyed future. Danielle Brooks stared at the mess she'd made, her heart pounding against her ribs like a caged bird desperate to escape. $800. Christopher Langford's voice cut through the silence like ice. That crystal was worth $800. She looked up at him, standing in his $1,000 suit, gray eyes cold as the February wind battering the windows. 3 months ago, those same eyes had burned with desire as he pulled her close in his study during one of those late nights when she stayed to organize his files. 3 months ago, his hands had trembled as they traced her skin, whispering her name like a prayer. Now he looked at her like she was nothing. "I'll pay for it," she whispered, knowing her entire month's salary wouldn't cover the cost. With what money? He stepped closer, and she caught his scent, expensive cologne and power. You people always think you can break what belongs to others and just walk away. You people. The words hit her like a slap. Danielle's fingers tightened around the pregnancy test hidden in her apron pocket. The 2 pink lines mocked her through the fabric, proof of a night she'd replayed 1,000 times, wondering if she'd imagined the tenderness in his touch. "Pack your things," Christopher continued, already turning away. "Security will escort you out in 30 minutes. I never want to see your face in my home again." Home. As if this cold monument to wealth had ever been a home to anyone. Danielle's throat burned, but she kept her chin high. "Yes, Mr. Langford." She'd learned long ago that pride was sometimes the only thing they couldn't take from you. Growing up in Atlanta, watching her mother clean houses for families who treated her like furniture, Danielle had sworn she'd never beg. Not for anything. Not even now, when begging might save her job and give her child a fighting chance. The elevator ride down felt endless, each floor a countdown to disaster. In her small apartment back in Atlanta, her mother was waiting for news about the raise Danielle had been too nervous to ask for. Instead, she was returning with empty pockets and a secret growing inside her. As the elevator doors closed on Christopher's cold stare, Danielle pressed her hand to her still flat stomach. The baby couldn't be more than 6 weeks along, barely real except for the morning sickness that had started 3 days ago and the exhaustion that made her bones feel like lead. She thought about that night in his study, how different he'd seemed. Vulnerable, almost broken as he told her about his father's death. How the empire he'd inherited felt like a prison made of expectations and cold marble. She'd reached for his hand to comfort him, and somehow comfort had become kissing. Kissing had become touching, and touching had become the kind of desperate connection that felt like coming alive for the first time. "I've never." She'd whispered against his neck, and he'd gone still. "Never what? Been with anyone like this? Anyone who made me feel." "What?" His voice was rough, tender, like I matter. He made love to her on the Persian rug in front of his fireplace, slow and careful, like she was something precious. Afterward, he'd held her close, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "You do matter," he'd said. "More than you know." But that man was gone now, replaced by the ruthless businessman who'd just destroyed her life over broken crystal. Maybe he'd never existed at all. Maybe she'd been just another conquest, another way for Christopher Langford to prove he could take whatever he wanted. The pregnancy test felt heavy in her pocket as she walked through the lobby, past doormen who'd learned her name over the 8 months she'd worked upstairs. They nodded politely, not knowing they were watching her funeral march. Outside, Manhattan winter bit through her thin coat. She had enough money saved for a bus ticket back to Atlanta and maybe 2 weeks of groceries. After that, Danielle pulled out her phone and stared at Christopher's number. One call could change everything. One conversation could give their child a father, financial security, a future beyond struggle and shame. But it could also destroy them both. She'd seen how he looked at weakness, how quickly tenderness turned to contempt in his world. If she told him about the baby, he'd either think she was lying to trap him, or he'd find a way to make both problems disappear. Men like Christopher Langford didn't let inconvenient truths ruin their carefully constructed lives. Have you ever kept a secret that could change everything? What would you do if your survival depended on staying silent? Tell me in the comments. The bus to Atlanta left in 3 hours. By tonight, she'd be 800 miles away from the man who'd fired her for clumsiness and fathered her child in equal measure. By tomorrow, she'd start building a life where Christopher Langford was just a memory that tasted like regret and felt like heartbreak. As the elevator doors closed on his cold stare, Danielle pressed her hand to her still flat stomach. In 9 months, that man would either be a father or a stranger who destroyed 2 lives with his pride. She returned to Atlanta carrying his child and his cruelty, but her mother saw through both. The small Atlanta apartment felt like a different world from Manhattan marble. Warm yellow walls, family photos, and the smell of cornbread couldn't erase the memory of his cold gray eyes. Danielle sat at her mother's kitchen table, the same scarred wood where she'd done homework 20 years ago, where dreams used to feel possible before reality taught her to aim lower. "Baby, you look like you've seen a ghost," Mama said, setting down a plate of cornbread still warm from the oven. At 62, Viola Brooks still moved like a woman half her age, all sharp elbows and sharper intuition. "What happened up there in New York?" Danielle broke off a piece of cornbread, the simple act of eating suddenly complicated by morning sickness that hit at random times. "Lost my job. Broke something expensive." Mama's eyes narrowed. "And what else you break?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Danielle had never been able to lie to her mother, not successfully. Viola Brooks had raised 4 children mostly alone after their father walked out, working 3 jobs and somehow still knowing everything that happened under her roof. "I'm pregnant." The words fell between them like stones in still water. Mama didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just reached across the table and covered Danielle's hand with her own. "How far along?" "About 2 months now." "And the daddy?" Danielle's throat closed. "He doesn't know." Doesn't know or don't want to know? That was the question, wasn't it? Christopher had fired her over broken crystal without a second thought. What would he do if he knew she carried his child? Would he deny it was his? Demand proof? Try to buy her silence or her absence? He's not. He's not a good man, Mama. Good men don't always make good babies, and bad men don't always make bad fathers. Viola squeezed her daughter's hand. But a man who don't know he got a child can't choose to be better. Danielle pulled her hand away, suddenly angry. "You think I should tell him? After he treated me like trash? After he called me you people like I was nothing? I think," Mama said carefully, "that baby in your belly deserves a chance to know where it came from. And you deserve to know if that man got any decency left in him." But Danielle had seen Christopher's decency. It lasted exactly as long as it took him to decide she wasn't worth the trouble. In his world, people like her were replaceable, forgettable, disposable. The next few weeks blurred together in a haze of job applications and morning sickness. Danielle found work cleaning offices downtown, night shift that paid barely enough for groceries. Her body was changing, subtle curves that made her work uniforms tight across the chest, exhaustion that made climbing stairs feel like mountain climbing. She'd lie in her childhood bed at night, hand pressed to her growing belly, and remember the weight of Christopher's body against hers, how he'd whispered her name like she was the only woman in the world. How could the same man who'd held her so tenderly fire her so coldly? "You eating for 2 now," Mama reminded her one morning, sliding extra eggs onto her plate. "That baby needs you strong." Danielle stared at the eggs, stomach churning. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not good enough? Good enough for what? To love your child? To work yourself to the bone to provide? Baby, you've been good enough your whole life. Don't let some rich man's opinion change what you know about yourself. But Christopher's opinion had changed everything. It had shown her how quickly respect could turn to contempt, how easily love could become cruelty. If he could dismiss her so completely after touching her so intimately, what did that say about her worth? Have you ever had to start over completely? When everything fell apart, who was there to catch you? Share your comeback story below. By her 6th month, Danielle's belly rounded obviously beneath her work shirts. She told her supervisor she was pregnant, but not who the father was. In Atlanta, single motherhood wasn't scandalous. It was just life. Women did what they had to do to survive and raise their children. She started having dreams about Christopher finding out about the baby. Sometimes he welcomed them both back, apologetic and loving. More often, he denied the child was his, threatened legal action, tried to pay her to disappear. She'd wake up sweating, heart pounding, hand protective over her belly. The baby moved constantly now, little flutters that felt like butterfly wings against her ribs. During her break at work, she'd sit in the empty office building lobby and talk to her unborn child. "Your daddy has gray eyes," she'd whisper. "Beautiful eyes that can be warm or cold depending on his mood. You might have his eyes, baby. I hope you get his intelligence too, but not his heart. His heart's too hard for someone as innocent as you." At 7 months, the dreams stopped being dreams. Danielle was mopping the executive floor of an office building when the contraction started. Sharp, sudden pain that doubled her over and sent the mop bucket clattering across polished marble. Too early. The baby wasn't due for 2 more months. "Help!" she called, but the building was empty except for security guards floors below. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, and she knew with terrifying clarity that her baby was coming whether it was ready or not. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and pain. Mama met them at the emergency room, face tight with worry, hand warm in Danielle's, as another contraction made her cry out. "Too early," Danielle gasped. "It's too early. Babies come when they're ready," Mama said. This little one just eager to meet its mama. But when the contraction started at 7 months, Danielle whispered a prayer that the baby wouldn't have his eyes. She was about to discover that some prayers go unanswered for a reason. The premature baby fighting for life in the NICU had eyes that could only belong to one man. And somehow, he already knew. The neonatal unit hummed with machines and whispered prayers, where tiny fighters waged battles their parents could only watch through glass walls and desperate hope. Danielle's son weighed 3 pounds, 2 ounces, his skin translucent as paper, tubes and wires making him look more machine than human. But his eyes, God help her, his eyes were exactly like his father's. "He's beautiful," Mama whispered, pressed against the incubator window. "Look at those long fingers. He's gonna be tall like his daddy." Danielle couldn't speak. Every time she looked at her son, she saw Christopher's face in miniature. The same strong jaw, the same determined mouth, the same gray eyes that seemed to see too much. Even fighting for every breath, the baby looked like he was planning his next move. They'd ended up in Chicago by accident. Danielle had been visiting her cousin when the contraction started, and Mercy General was the closest hospital. Now she was stuck in a city where she knew no one, watching her premature son battle for life while medical bills piled up like snow in a blizzard. "Mom." A nurse appeared beside her, clipboard in hand. "We need to discuss payment options for extended NICU care." The numbers on the paper made Danielle's head spin. Hundreds of thousands of dollars for equipment that kept her son breathing, medicine that kept his tiny organs functioning, specialists who monitored every heartbeat. "I don't have insurance," she said quietly. "I was between jobs when he was born." The nurse's expression softened. "There are programs, assistance options. But for care this extensive, you might want to consider." She paused delicately. "Is there anyone who could help? Family? The father?" Danielle stared at her son through the incubator glass. Christopher Langford could pay these bills without blinking. One phone call could save her child's life and secure his future. But that same phone call could destroy them both if Christopher decided he didn't want a son who reminded everyone of his moment of weakness with the help. "The father's not in the picture," she said. But that night, alone in the hospital chapel, while Mama watched the baby, Danielle pulled out her phone and stared at Christopher's contact information. Her finger hovered over the call button for 10 minutes before she put the phone away. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. The next morning, she was pumping milk in the NICU family room when commotion erupted outside. Voices, urgent footsteps, someone talking about security protocols. Through the small window, she saw hospital staff gathered around the elevator bank, looking excited and nervous. "What's happening?" she asked a nurse. "Oh, honey, you didn't hear? Christopher Langford just walked into our lobby. You know, the billionaire? Apparently, he owns half the hospital board. Security's trying to figure out why he's here." Danielle's blood turned to ice water. The breast pump fell from numb fingers, milk spilling across the floor like tears she couldn't shed. He knew. Somehow, someway, Christopher knew about the baby. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone? When did you realize there was more beneath the surface? Tell me about that moment. Her legs shook as she walked back to the NICU, each step feeling like walking to her execution. Through the glass doors, she could see him standing beside her son's incubator, still wearing that expensive suit, still radiating power and control. But his face was broken open in a way she'd never seen. Christopher Langford, the man who fired her over Crystal, who called her "you people," who treated her like disposable furniture, was crying as he stared at their son. "Sir, you can't be in here without," a nurse was saying. "That's my son," Christopher said, voice rough with emotion. "That's my son fighting for his life, and no one told me." His gray eyes met hers through the glass, and for a moment, time stopped. 8 months of hurt and anger and fear crystallized into this single moment where everything she thought she knew crumbled into dust. Danielle, her name on his lips, sounded like an apology, and a plea rolled into one. The nurse's words froze her blood. "There's a man downstairs demanding to see your baby. Says he's the father. Security wants to know if we should call the police or let him up." But now he was here, and the way he looked at their son, protective, amazed, devastated, made her realize she'd been wrong about everything. Christopher Langford walked into that hospital like he owned it, because he actually did. He stood in the NICU doorway wearing a $1,000 suit among machines and miracles, looking as out of place as diamonds and dust, until he saw the baby and his face cracked open. Danielle watched him approach their son's incubator with the careful reverence of a man touching something holy. "How long has he been here?" Christopher's voice was barely above a whisper. 2 weeks. Danielle's throat felt raw. He was born at 28 weeks. 3 pounds, 2 ounces. Christopher placed his hand against the incubator glass, and their son's tiny fingers seemed to reach toward the warmth. "What's his name?" She'd been calling him Baby Brooks on all the paperwork, but suddenly that felt wrong. This child had a father's eyes, a father's determined chin, a father's stubborn refusal to give up even when the odds were impossible. "I haven't. I was waiting to see if he..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "He's going to make it." Christopher's voice carried absolute certainty. "Look at him. He's a fighter. Just like his father," Danielle thought, but didn't say. "How did you find us?" The question she'd been dreading came out smaller than she'd intended. Christopher's jaw tightened. "After you left New York, I couldn't get you out of my head. Something about how you looked when I fired you. I hired investigators to find you. When they reported you'd had a baby in Chicago, I knew." "You knew what?" His gray eyes met hers, and she saw pain there that matched her own. "I knew I'd been a fool. I knew I'd thrown away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too proud and too scared to admit I'd fallen in love with my maid." The words hit her like physical blows. "Love." He'd said love. "You fired me," she whispered. "You called me you people like I was nothing." Christopher's face crumpled. "I know. God help me. I know what I did to you. That morning, seeing you there so beautiful, so real in my perfect cold world, it terrified me. I'd spent the night thinking about our time together, about how you made me feel human again. And then I saw you standing there and panicked. So you destroyed me instead? I thought if I hurt you enough, you'd leave before I could hurt you worse." His hand pressed flat against the incubator. "I thought I was protecting you from me. From my world. From the way I ruin everything I touch. Danielle stared at him. This powerful man brought to his knees by a 3-pound baby and his own guilt. You don't get to decide what's good for me. You don't get to make my choices. You're right. He turned to face her fully. But I'm here now, and I want to make this right. Whatever it takes. Before she could respond, he pulled out his phone and made a call that changed everything. Dr. Martinez? Christopher Langford. I need the best neonatal team money can buy transferred to Mercy General immediately. Cost is no object. Yes, tonight, because that's my son in your NICU, and he deserves the best care in the world. Danielle watched him orchestrate miracles with phone calls, her heart torn between gratitude and fury. This was what money could do, transform impossible situations into manageable problems. But it was also what she'd been afraid of. Christopher taking control, making decisions, treating her like she was too small to matter in her own son's life. You can't just swoop in. I'm not swooping, Christopher interrupted. I'm doing what I should have done 8 months ago. I'm taking care of the woman I love and the child we made together. The words hung between them like bridge cables, strong enough to support impossible weight or snap under the pressure of too much hope. Their son chose that moment to open his eyes, those perfect gray mirrors that reflected his father's face. Christopher's breath caught, and when he looked at Danielle, tears tracked down his cheeks without shame. He has your strength, he said softly, fighting when he should be giving up, surviving when everything's against him. The electricity when their hands brushed reaching for the incubator was the same as it had been that night in his study. Immediate, undeniable, dangerous. But now it carried 8 months of hurt and the weight of their son's future. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone? When did you realize there was more beneath the surface? Tell me about that moment. Why now, she asked. Why come looking for me? Christopher's smile was sad and honest. Because I've been dying without you. Because every day I didn't know where you were, felt like losing a piece of my soul. Because I realized too late that loving you wasn't my weakness. It was the only thing that made me strong. A nurse approached with legal documents, and Danielle's heart sank. Here it comes, she thought. The custody battle, the demands, the proof that this was all about control and not love. But Christopher's next words shattered every assumption she'd built to protect herself. His voice broke as he whispered, I've been looking for you for 8 months. But before she could respond, he placed legal papers on the table that would change everything. And she hadn't even read the devastating secret hidden in the fine print. She expected lawyers and custody battles. Instead, he gave her something that made the entire hospital's staff gasp in disbelief. The legal papers rustled in the sterile air like autumn leaves, each signature worth millions, while their premature son fought for breath just feet away, life and wealth colliding in ways that made everyone watching hold their breath. The nurse who'd brought the documents stood frozen, clearly having read enough to understand she was witnessing something unprecedented. What is this? Danielle's hands trembled as she scanned the first page, legal language swimming before her exhausted eyes. Read it, Christopher said quietly. All of it. The hospital social worker had appeared, along with what looked like half the administrative staff. Word traveled fast when Christopher Langford did anything unexpected, and apparently giving away millions of dollars to the mother of his son qualified as newsworthy. Danielle found her voice halfway through the second page. This is a property deed. To my penthouse in Chicago, Christopher confirmed. $12 million, free and clear. No mortgage, no strings attached. I don't understand. A crowd had gathered. Nurses, doctors, even security guard who'd abandoned their post to witness whatever was happening in the NICU family conference room. Danielle felt their stares like weight, their whispered conversations creating a buzz that made her skin crawl. You need somewhere to live while our son recovers, Christopher said. Somewhere close to the hospital, somewhere safe and comfortable. This way, you never have to worry about rent or losing your home. It's yours completely. The social worker leaned forward. Mr. Langford, gifts of this magnitude typically require. It's not a gift, Christopher interrupted. It's what I owe her for 8 months of not knowing my son existed. For 8 months of her raising him alone while I lived in ignorance. Danielle's eyes blurred as she reached the signature lines. You're just giving me a $12 million penthouse? I'm giving you security, independence, the knowledge that no matter what happens between us, you and our son will always have a home. The gesture should have felt generous, overwhelming, perfect. Instead, it felt dangerous. Men like Christopher didn't give away millions without expecting something in return. There had to be a catch, a hidden clause, something that would give him power over her life. She kept reading, looking for the trap. Instead, she found something that made her knees weak. For Danielle Brooks and her children, she read aloud, voice barely audible. Children, plural. Christopher's face remained carefully neutral, but she caught the flash of something. Hope? Fear? In his gray eyes. I don't have children, plural, she said slowly. I have one son, currently fighting for his life 10 feet away. I know, his voice was so soft, she almost missed it. But someday you might. And when that day comes, I want you to know they'll have a home too. The implication hit her like lightning. He wasn't just acknowledging their son. He was planning for a future where there might be more children. Their children, together. The accidental brush of fingers as she took the papers sent electricity up her arm, the same current that had gotten them into this situation in the first place. His touch lingered a moment too long, thumb tracing across her knuckles like he was memorizing the feel of her skin. If someone who hurt you tried to make amends with a grand gesture, would you trust it? What would it take for you to forgive? Share your thoughts. Why? The question came out broken, 8 months of pain and confusion compressed into a single syllable. Christopher's composure cracked. Because I was wrong. Because I hurt you when I should have protected you. Because you were carrying my child and I was too much of a coward to see what was right in front of me. And if I don't want your penthouse, if I don't want your money, then sign the papers over to our son. Sell it and put the money in trust for his education. Do whatever you want with it. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from every line of his body. But don't make our child pay for my mistakes. It was masterfully done, she realized. Frame it as being about their son. Make refusal seem selfish. But looking at Christopher's face, she saw something that looked like genuine desperation beneath the calculated generosity. The hospital administrator approached with a clipboard. Ms. Brooks, if you're accepting this transfer, we'll need to update our billing information. Mr. Langford has also authorized unlimited medical expenses for your son's care. Unlimited? Danielle's voice cracked. Whatever it takes, Christopher confirmed. The best doctors, the newest treatments, experimental procedures, if necessary. Money is not a factor in our son's care. Our son. He kept saying our son, like they were a team instead of strangers connected by DNA and bad decisions. As she stared at the deed to his $12 million penthouse, one line made her knees buckle. For Danielle and our children, plural. He knew something she thought she'd hidden forever. Some secrets are buried so deep that when they surface, they don't just change your life. They rewrite your entire history. The hospital chapel offered sanctuary from beeping machines and clinical lights, where stained glass painted rainbow prayers across worn wooden pews and whispered confessions. Danielle sat in the front row, the property deed still clutched in her shaking hands, while Christopher settled beside her with the careful distance of a man approaching a wounded animal. You wrote children plural, she said without looking at him. Why would you do that if you didn't know? Christopher was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of months of investigation and sleepless nights. The hospital records from Atlanta, from 8 months before our son was born. He paused. You were admitted for miscarriage, Danielle. 2 weeks after I fired you. The words hit her like physical blows. She'd hidden that loss so carefully, buried it so deep that most days she could pretend it never happened. But late at night, when grief crept through the cracks in her armor, she remembered the baby she'd lost before she even knew she was pregnant with the one who survived. You had no right to look into my medical records. You're right. I had no right to do a lot of things. Christopher shifted closer, his voice rough with emotion. "But I needed to understand why you looked so broken when I fired you. Why you seemed to disappear into yourself. I thought maybe you were sick, maybe you needed help, and I'd been too blind to see it." Tears she'd held back for months finally broke free. "I lost your baby because of the stress. Because you fired me, and I had nowhere to go and no money for a doctor. I lost the first one, and then when I got pregnant again, I was terrified the same thing would happen." Christopher's face went white. "Danielle, I was going to tell you about the first pregnancy that day. I had the test in my pocket, and I was trying to find the courage to say the words. Then you started yelling about the crystal and calling me names, and I knew there was no point. The words poured out like poison she'd been storing. What'd you have done? Accuse me of lying? Try to pay me to disappear? Used your lawyers to make sure I never bothered you again? I would have married you." The simple words stopped her tears like a slap. "What?" Christopher turned to face her fully, his gray eyes blazing with intensity that reminded her why she'd fallen for him in the first place. "If you told me you were pregnant that day, I would have married you. Not because I had to, but because I'd already fallen in love with you and was too scared to admit it. That's easy to say now, is it?" He pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then handed it to her. "Look at the date on this." It was a jewelry website pulled up on his browser 8 months ago, the day after he'd fired her. He'd been looking at engagement rings. Danielle stared at the screen, her world tilting sideways. "You were shopping for rings? I've been planning to propose for weeks. I had this whole thing planned, dinner at your favorite restaurant, the one with the terrible coffee, but the best apple pie in Manhattan. I was going to tell you I loved you and ask you to marry me." His voice broke. "Then I panicked when I saw you that morning, looking so beautiful and real in my fake world, and I sabotaged everything." The phone fell from her numb fingers. "You love me. I've never stopped loving you. Even when I convinced myself it was just physical. Even when I tried to forget you with other women who meant nothing." Christopher reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "Losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Losing our first child because of that mistake. I don't know how to live with that." His touch was warm, familiar, dangerous. 8 months of hurt and anger warred with a part of her that had never stopped loving him either. The part that had dreamed of this moment, this apology, this admission that she mattered to him after all. When someone finally understood your pain without judgment, how did it feel? "Share if you're comfortable." "Why should I believe you?" she whispered. "How do I know this isn't just guilt talking? How do I know you won't change your mind again when things get complicated?" Christopher lifted their joined hands and pressed them against his chest, over his heart. "Because I can't breathe without you. Because every day for 8 months, I've woken up reaching for you and finding empty space. Because when I saw our son in that incubator, I realized I'd already lost too much time being a coward." The chapel door opened and Mama appeared, taking in the scene with knowing eyes. "Baby, you need to come back. The doctors want to talk to us about the new treatment plan." Danielle started to pull her hand away, but Christopher held on. "Whatever they need, whatever it costs, whatever decision has to be made, we make it together. As his parents." The walk back to the NICU felt different with Christopher beside her, their fingers intertwined, their son's future stretching ahead of them like uncharted territory. The medical team was waiting with charts and cautious optimism, discussing experimental treatments and improved odds. With the new equipment arriving tonight and Dr. Peterson's team flying in from Johns Hopkins, we're looking at a much more promising outlook, the neonatal specialist explained. "Your son is responding well to treatment." "Our son," Danielle thought, glancing at Christopher. For the first time, that felt like the truth instead of a dream. After the doctors left, they stood together by the incubator, watching their tiny fighter sleep. Christopher's hand rested on her lower back, a gesture so natural it felt like coming home. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I need to tell you." Christopher went still. "What?" She turned to face him, decision made. "I never told you why I really kept the pregnancy secret. It wasn't just fear of how you'd react." "Then what?" "I was ashamed." The words came out in a rush. "Ashamed that I'd let myself fall in love with a man who saw me as disposable. Ashamed that I'd been naive enough to think what we had meant something. Ashamed that I was just another poor girl who got pregnant by her rich employer. Christopher's hands came up to frame her face, thumbs wiping away tears she didn't realize had fallen. You were never just anything to me. You were everything. You were the first real thing in my life. The kiss that followed was soft, desperate, 8 months of longing compressed into a moment of forgiveness and hope. When they broke apart, Christopher rested his forehead against hers. We're going to figure this out, he promised. All of it, together. Through her tears, she whispered the words that had haunted her. I lost your baby before, and I thought if I told you about this one, you'd take him away too. His response would either heal them both or destroy what was left. He didn't try to fix her broken pieces. Instead, he learned to love the scars they left behind. The NICU became their world, where time measured itself in feeding schedules and breathing patterns, where two broken adults learned to be whole for the tiny life, depending on them both. Christopher had moved into a hotel across from the hospital, close enough to be there in minutes if something changed, far enough to give Danielle space to process everything that had happened between them. You don't have to stay, she told him on the third day, watching him fold himself into the uncomfortable visitor chair beside their son's incubator. You have a company to run, a life in New York. This is my life now, he said simply. Right here with you and him. The words should have felt overwhelming, possessive, too much too fast. Instead, they felt like relief. For 8 months, she'd carried the weight of pregnancy and parenthood alone. Having someone share that burden felt like learning to breathe again. Christopher was different here, away from his marble penthouse and power suits. He'd traded designer clothes for jeans and t-shirts, his usual commanding presence softened by exhaustion and worry. He learned the nurses' names, brought coffee for the other parents, sat quietly during the medical updates without trying to take control. He looks stronger today, Danielle observed, watching their son sleep peacefully for the first time since birth. He's got your fighting spirit, Christopher said, reaching through the incubator's porthole to stroke their baby's tiny hand with one finger. Your refusal to give up when everything's against you. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. For so long, she'd seen her stubbornness as a flaw, something that made her difficult to love. But Christopher spoke of it like a gift, like strength instead of weakness. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice carefully neutral. The penthouse, the medical bills, all of this. What do you expect in return? Christopher's hand stilled on the incubator. Nothing. Nothing. I expect nothing, Danielle. I hope for everything, but I expect nothing. He turned to look at her directly. I hope someday you'll trust me again. I hope someday you'll let me be part of your life, part of his life. But I don't expect it, and I'm not buying it with real estate or medical bills. The honesty in his voice made her chest tight. And if I decide I don't want you in our lives, if I take your penthouse and your money and disappear, then I'll know I gave my son the best possible start in life, and his mother the security she deserves. Christopher's smile was sad but genuine. I'd rather you be safe and happy without me than struggling and miserable with me. It was the answer she needed to hear, the proof that his generosity came without strings attached. But it also made her realize how much she'd missed him, how much she'd wanted him to fight for them instead of letting her walk away 8 months ago. What does it mean to truly start over with someone? Have you ever had to rebuild trust for nothing? Tell me how you did it. The stolen kiss happened in the supply closet on a Tuesday afternoon. They'd gone to get extra blankets for their son, the space cramped and dim, filled with the clean scent of hospital laundry. Danielle turned to say something about the new feeding schedule and found Christopher inches away, his gray eyes dark with need. I've missed you, he whispered, voice rough with months of restraint. Christopher, I know we're not there yet. I know I have to earn your trust back. But God, Danielle, I've missed the way you taste, the way you feel against me. The kiss was desperate, hungry, 8 months of longing poured into stolen moments between hospital shifts. His hands tangled in her hair while hers fisted in his shirt, both of them remembering what it felt like to want someone this much. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together in a cramped space. "This doesn't fix everything," Danielle said, even as her body hummed with familiar electricity. "I know, but it's a start." That night, she agreed to stay at the penthouse he'd signed over to her. The space was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, modern furniture that managed to feel warm instead of cold, a nursery that had been prepared with obvious care and hope. "You did this before you found us," she said, standing in the nursery doorway. "It wasn't a question. I hoped," Christopher admitted, standing beside her. "Even when I didn't know if you'd ever forgive me, I hoped someday there might be a child who needed this room." The walls were painted soft yellow, gender-neutral, with a mural of clouds and stars that felt like dreaming made visible. The crib was positioned to catch morning light, surrounded by everything a baby could need and more. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You can change anything you want. Paint, furniture, all of it. This is your home now. Your home. Not ours, not his, hers." The distinction mattered, the proof that he meant what he said about giving without expecting. When she agreed to move into the penthouse, temporarily, while the baby recovered, neither expected what they'd find hidden in his personal safe. Evidence that would change everything they thought they knew about that night. She was fired. The security footage he'd kept for 8 months revealed a truth that made her firing look like salvation instead of cruelty. The penthouse office glowed with city lights as the security monitor flickered to life, each frame revealing layers of deception and protection that had been hiding in plain sight. Danielle sat beside Christopher on the leather couch, their son sleeping peacefully in the portable crib they'd borrowed from the hospital for his first night home. "Why do you still have this?" she asked, watching herself on the grainy footage from 8 months ago. "Because I knew something was wrong." Christopher's voice was tight with old anger. "The way you looked that morning, the way you moved, you were terrified of something, and it wasn't just about breaking crystal." On screen, past Danielle moved through the penthouse like a woman walking through a minefield. She kept glancing over her shoulder, jumping at small sounds, her usual grace replaced by nervous energy that screamed of fear. "I don't remember being that scared," Danielle said. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt the echo of that morning's dread. "Watch," Christopher said quietly. Fast-forwarding to the moment everything changed. The footage showed her in his study, dusting the bookshelf with careful precision. But she wasn't alone. A shadow moved in the hallway. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone who'd entered the penthouse without permission. "My business partner," Christopher said, voice flat with disgust. "Marcus Webb. He had access codes, knew my schedule, thought the place would be empty." On screen, Marcus appeared in the study doorway, startling past Danielle so badly she knocked over a lamp. But instead of helping her or leaving, he moved closer, trapping her against the bookshelf with his body. "He was touching you." Christopher's hands clenched into fists. "Threatening you. That's why you look so afraid." Danielle watched herself try to escape, saw Marcus grab her arm, saw the moment she broke free and ran toward the living room, directly into the crystal display that shattered under her desperate flight. "He was the one who broke it," she breathed. "I was running from him, and I fired you for it without asking what happened." Christopher's voice cracked with guilt. "I saw the mess, saw you standing there looking guilty, and I assumed the worst. I never thought to ask why you looked like you'd seen a ghost." The footage continued, showing Marcus slipping out through the service entrance while Danielle stood in the wreckage of her job and her safety. By the time Christopher appeared on screen, Marcus was long gone, leaving her to take the blame for his assault and his destruction. "Why didn't you tell me?" Christopher asked. "Why didn't you say he'd attacked you?" Danielle's throat closed with the memory of that morning's terror. "Who would have believed me? Your business partner's word against the Maid's? I barely escaped with my dignity intact. If I'd accused him, he would have destroyed you." Christopher understood immediately. Used his connections, his reputation, made sure you never worked in the city again. "So I ran instead." She looked at their sleeping son, so peaceful in his ignorance of the violence that had preceded his existence. "I thought if I stayed quiet, he'd leave me alone. I never imagined you'd come looking for me." Christopher stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the city lights. "I fired you to protect you. Not from me, from him. I'd started noticing how he looked at you, the comments he made. I thought if you weren't working for me anymore, he'd lose interest. You fired me to protect me. I handled it wrong. I should have fired him, should have had him arrested, should have made sure he never hurt another woman. Christopher's reflection in the window looked haunted. Instead, I hurt you to save you and ended up losing everything that mattered. The truth settled between them like a bridge finally completed. Christopher hadn't fired her out of cruelty or indifference. He'd fired her out of a misguided attempt to keep her safe from a predator in his own business. Has anyone ever protected you in a way you didn't understand at the time? When did you realize love sometimes looks like letting go? Share your story. What happened to Marcus? She asked. I destroyed him. Christopher's voice carried cold satisfaction. Once I realized what he'd done to you, I made sure he lost everything. His partnership, his reputation, his ability to hurt anyone else. He's bankrupt and blacklisted from every major firm in the country. The justice should have felt satisfying, but all Danielle felt was exhaustion. 8 months of believing she'd been fired for clumsiness. 8 months of thinking Christopher saw her as disposable. 8 months of carrying guilt and shame that had never been hers to bear. Christopher returned to the couch, sitting close enough that she could feel his warmth. I'm sorry. For all of it. For not protecting you better. For making you run. For the baby we lost because I was too proud to handle the situation correctly. You didn't know about the pregnancy, but I knew something was wrong, and I chose the cowardly way out instead of fighting for you. His hand covered hers, warm and steady. I won't make that mistake again. The kiss that followed was different from the desperate one in the supply closet. This was thorough, claiming, full of 8 months of apology and promise. Christopher's hands framed her face like she was something precious, his mouth moving against hers with a reverence that made her bones melt. When they broke apart, she was in his lap, her hands fisted in his shirt, both of them breathing hard. Danielle, he said her name like a prayer. Show me, she whispered against his neck. Show me I matter to you. What followed was 8 months of need compressed into desperate touching. Gentle hands relearning familiar territory, whispered apologies and promises between kisses that tasted like coming home. As their bodies moved together with desperate hunger, she whispered against his neck. There's something else I never told you. His response died on his lips when she revealed the secret that would test their newfound trust. His mother arrived expecting to meet a gold digger. Instead, she found the woman who might finally teach her son how to love. The formal dining room stretched like a battlefield, crystal glasses catching candlelight, while 3 generations sat across mahogany territory, each place setting a declaration of war or peace. Eleanor Langford had arrived from New York with the subtle violence of old money and older prejudices, her designer suit armor against a world that refused to bend to her will. So, Eleanor said, cutting her steak with surgical precision, "You're the maid." "I was," Danielle replied evenly. "Now I'm the mother of your grandson." Christopher's hand found hers under the table, his thumb tracing reassuring circles against her palm. 3 weeks had passed since their son came home from the hospital, 3 weeks of sleepless nights and quiet mornings that felt like building something precious from scratch. "How convenient," Eleanor continued, her smile sharp as her knife. "Getting pregnant right before being terminated. One might call it fortuitous timing." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Danielle felt Christopher tense beside her, his protective instincts rising, but she squeezed his hand to keep him quiet. This was her battle to fight. "One might," Danielle agreed pleasantly, "if one were the kind of person who assumed the worst about everyone they met. But I prefer to think of it as love creating life, even when everything else was falling apart." Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose a fraction. "Love? How romantic. And how much is this love costing my son?" "Mother," Christopher's voice carried warning. "It's a fair question," Danielle said, meeting Eleanor's cold gaze directly. "Your son has been incredibly generous. He's given me a home, covered medical expenses, made sure our son has everything he needs. But he's not buying my affection, Mrs. Langford. He's earning my forgiveness." "Forgiveness for what?" The question was a trap, designed to make Danielle reveal their complicated history. But Christopher answered instead, his voice steady with resolution. For being a coward. For hurting the woman I love, because I was too scared to admit how much she meant to me. For almost losing my family because I cared more about appearances than truth. Eleanor's facade cracked slightly. Christopher, Danielle isn't here because she trapped me or manipulated me. Christopher continued. She's here because I spent 8 months learning that everything I thought I wanted was meaningless without her. The baby's cry from a nursery interrupted the tension, and Danielle started to rise. But Christopher was already standing, his hand on her shoulder. I've got him, he said, dropping a kiss on the top of her head before leaving the room. Alone with Eleanor, Danielle braced for the real attack she knew was coming. 20 million, Eleanor said without preamble. Excuse me, $20 million. Cash. To disappear with your child and never contact my son again. The offer should have been insulting, should have made her angry. Instead, it made her sad. You really think that's what this is about? Money, isn't it always? Danielle looked around the penthouse, at the art worth more than most people made in a lifetime, at the view that cost millions, at the life of luxury she'd never dreamed of having. Then she thought about Christopher in the nursery, probably singing off-key lullabies like he did every night. And her answer came easy. Your son could lose every penny tomorrow, and I'd still be here, she said quietly. Because I'm not in love with his money, Mrs. Langford. I'm in love with the man who reads bedtime stories to a baby who can't understand words yet. I'm in love with the man who learned how to change diapers by watching YouTube videos. I'm in love with the man your son becomes when nobody's watching. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. And if I told you I disinherit him, cut him off completely, then I'd tell you that you raised a son strong enough to build his own empire from nothing. And I'd be proud to help him do it. Have you ever had to prove your worth to someone's family? How did you handle judgment from people who mattered to your partner? Tell me below. Christopher returned carrying their son, who'd settled into quiet alertness against his father's chest. The sight of them together, dark-haired baby and gray-eyed man, both stubborn and beautiful in different ways, made Danielle's heart ache with love. Everything all right? Christopher asked, sensing the tension in the room. Your mother was just offering me $20 million to disappear, Danielle said conversationally. Christopher went very still. She was what? Mother. His voice carried a warning that made Eleanor shift uncomfortably in her chair. I was protecting your interests, Eleanor said defensively. This woman has a name. She's Danielle. She's the mother of your grandson, and she's going to be my wife. Christopher's declaration fell into the room like a bomb. So you can either accept that and be part of our family, or you can leave. But you will never, ever disrespect her in my home again. Danielle's heart stopped. Wife. They hadn't discussed marriage, hadn't even fully figured out what they were to each other beyond parents and tentative lovers. Eleanor stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking. If you marry her, don't expect another penny from me. I'll cut you off completely. Christopher shifted the baby to one arm and reached for Danielle's hand with the other, pulling her close against his side. Then I choose her. The simple words reverberated through the dining room like a gavel falling. Eleanor's face went white, then red, then white again as she processed what her son had just said. You give up everything? Your inheritance, your family connections, your position in society? For her. Christopher looked down at Danielle, then at their son, then back at his mother. I give up everything for them, but I'm not giving up anything that matters. I'm choosing the family I want to build over the one that's trying to tear me down. Eleanor gathered her purse with sharp, angry movements. You'll regret this, Christopher. When the novelty wears off, when reality sets in, you'll realize what you've thrown away. The only thing I regret, Christopher said quietly, is waiting so long to choose love over fear. After Eleanor left in a storm of expensive perfume and wounded pride, Christopher set their son in his bouncy seat and pulled Danielle into his arms. Did you mean it? She asked against his chest. About marriage? I meant every word. I want to marry you, Danielle. I want to build a life with you, have more babies with you, grow old with you. I want everything. The kiss that followed was deep, claiming, full of promise and hope. When they broke apart, Danielle could see their future stretching ahead. Imperfect, challenging, but theirs to build together. When his mother threatened to disinherit him if he stayed with the help, Christopher's response silenced the room. Then, I choose her. But outside, Danielle overheard something that would make her question everything. She overheard him tell his lawyer to prepare a prenup, and for one crushing moment, thought she'd been played again. The rooftop garden bloomed with spring promise. Fairy lights strung between budding trees like captured stars, while the ring box burned in his pocket and doubt poisoned the air between them. Christopher had planned this moment for weeks, waiting for the perfect evening when their son was sleeping peacefully and the city spread below them like a carpet of possibilities. But Danielle sat on the garden bench like a woman preparing for execution rather than a proposal. "You heard me talking to James," Christopher said. "It wasn't a question. I heard you tell your lawyer to prepare a prenuptial agreement, yes." Her voice was carefully neutral, the same tone she'd used when he fired her 8 months ago. "Very thorough of you to protect your assets before proposing." Christopher's heart sank. He'd hoped to explain everything before she found out, hoped to make her understand that the prenup wasn't what it seemed. Instead, she'd overheard half a conversation and drawn the worst possible conclusion. "It's not what you think, isn't it?" Danielle stood, pacing to the garden railing that overlooked the city lights. 24 hours after your mother offers me money to disappear, you're suddenly worried about protecting your fortune. Quite a coincidence. Danielle, please, let me explain. Oh, I understand perfectly. Her laugh was bitter, broken. This whole thing, the penthouse, the medical bills, the sweet words about love and family, it's all been one elaborate manipulation. Keep the gold digger happy while you protect yourself legally. The accusation hit Christopher like a physical blow. After everything they'd been through, everything they'd rebuilt, she still saw him as the enemy. Still expected betrayal from the man who'd rather lose everything than lose her. "You really think that's what this is?" he asked quietly. "What else am I supposed to think? Your mother threatens to cut you off, and suddenly you're talking to lawyers about prenups. You're just like every other rich man who wants to play with the help but won't risk anything real." Christopher pulled the ring box from his pocket, the diamond catching starlight as he sat on the bench between them. "This is what I was going to show you tonight. Before you heard the phone call, before you decided I was the villain again." Danielle stared at the ring. A classic solitaire that managed to be elegant without being ostentatious. The kind of ring that whispered forever rather than screaming wealth. "It's beautiful," she said carefully. "I'm sure the prenup that goes with it is very thorough." "There is no prenup." The words hung in the air like smoke. Danielle turned to face him, confusion replacing anger in her dark eyes. "What? I told James to prepare a prenup, yes, but not the kind you think." Christopher moved closer, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. "I asked him to draft an agreement that gives you everything if something happens to our marriage. The penthouse, the business, my entire fortune. Everything." Danielle's mouth fell open. That's not how prenups work. It is when you're more worried about protecting your wife than protecting your assets." Christopher reached for her hands, relief flooding through him when she didn't pull away. "I don't want you to marry me and wonder if I'll change my mind again. I don't want you to worry that I'll leave you with nothing if we don't work out. I want you to know that choosing me is safe, that I'll never put you in a position where you have to depend on my goodwill to survive." The fight went out of her all at once, leaving her swaying on her feet. Christopher caught her, pulling her close as the truth of what he'd done settled between them. "You were going to give me everything," she whispered against his chest. "I was going to protect you the only way I knew how, by making sure you never have to be afraid of me, or depend on me, or worry that I hold all the power." Christopher's voice was rough with emotion. "I love you, Danielle, but I also respect you too much to ask you to trust me with your entire future without giving you an escape route. Have you ever jumped to the wrong conclusion about someone you love? How did miscommunication almost cost you something precious? Share your experience." The kiss that followed tasted like apology and relief. 8 months of mistrust finally dissolving under the weight of his impossible generosity. When they broke apart, Christopher dropped to one knee, the ring box open in his trembling hands. "Danielle Brooks, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your love? Will you build a family with me, fight with me, grow old with me?" Through her tears, she saw the future he was offering. Not just wealth and security, but partnership and respect, and the kind of love that protected instead of possessed. "Yes," she breathed, and then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slipped onto her finger like it had been made for her hand, which Christopher later admitted it had been. He'd had it designed specifically for her, sized for memory of holding her hand during those long nights in the NICU. They made love that night on the rooftop garden, city lights painting their skin silver while their son slept peacefully in the nursery below. It was different from their desperate encounters before, slower, deeper, full of promise rather than desperation. "I love you," Christopher whispered against her throat as she moved above him, the engagement ring catching starlight on her left hand. "I love your strength, your courage, your refusal to make things easy for me. I love you too," she gasped, lost in the sensation of being completely claimed, completely cherished. "Even when you make me crazy, even when I want to hit you, I love you." Afterward, they lay tangled together under the stars, planning a wedding and a future and all the babies they wanted to fill the nursery Christopher had prepared with such hope. When she said yes to his proposal, the ring slipped perfectly on her finger, but the prenup she'd worried about contained a clause that would shock her more than any jewelry. He was giving her everything. The tabloids called her a gold digger who trapped a billionaire, but they had no idea she was the one with all the power. 2 months after their engagement, Danielle learned what it meant to live under a microscope. Every time I walked outside, cameras flashed like lightning strikes. Every grocery store trip became front-page news. Maid Mary's millions screamed for magazine racks while she bought baby formula. The worst part wasn't the lies they printed. It was watching Christopher's jaw clench every time someone called her a fortune hunter. His protective instincts kicked into overdrive, hiring security teams and threatening lawsuits against anyone who got too close to their son. "Let them talk," she whispered one evening as he paced their living room. Another gossip magazine crumpled in his fist. Little Michael slept peacefully in his bouncer, oblivious to the chaos surrounding his existence. Christopher stopped pacing and looked at her with those gray eyes that had once fired her and now promised forever. "They're calling you names that would make sailors blush. How can you be so calm?" She smiled. That quiet strength that had carried her through poverty and pregnancy, now carrying her through fame and fortune. "Because I know something they don't." "What's that?" "I could leave tomorrow with half of everything you own, plus child support that would make their heads spin." "The prenup you insisted I sign? It protects you about as much as tissue paper in a hurricane." His laugh filled the room like music. "You read the fine print. Every word. 3 times. She stood and walked to him, her hands sliding up his chest to rest against his racing heart. "So, when they call me a gold digger, I just smile. Because if I wanted your money, I'd already have it. Have you ever been judged for something you didn't even do? When people made assumptions about your relationship, how did you prove them wrong? Tell me in the comments." That night, as cameras flashed outside their bedroom windows, Christopher showed her exactly how much he appreciated her strength. His hands worshipped every curve of her body like she was precious artwork, his mouth whispering promises against her skin that no tabloid would ever print. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets worth more than most people's cars, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Don't answer it," she murmured against his shoulder. But something made him look at the screen. The text message made his blood turn to ice. Saw the news. "She looks happy. Shame if something happened to ruin that." Marcus Webb wasn't done with him yet. Her ex-husband's return wasn't about wanting her back. It was about wanting everything Christopher had given her. Marcus Webb arrived at the penthouse lobby on a Tuesday morning like a storm nobody saw coming. The doorman called up, confusion clear in his voice. "Mrs. Brooks?" There's a man here claiming to be your husband. Says he has legal papers. Danielle's coffee cup shattered against the marble floor. She hadn't heard that name in 2 years. Hadn't thought about the man who used his fists to win arguments and his charm to cover the bruises. The man she'd fled from in the middle of the night with nothing but a suitcase and determination to survive. Now he was downstairs with legal papers, and she knew exactly what he wanted. "He's not my husband," she told the doorman, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. "Tell security to escort him out." But Marcus Webb had never been easily discouraged. By afternoon, process servers arrived with custody papers that made Christopher's lawyers work overtime. By evening, news vans lined their street like vultures waiting for death. Baby daddy drama became the headline that defined their week. Christopher found her in the nursery at midnight, staring at their sleeping son with tears streaming down her face. Michael's tiny chest rose and fell with the rhythm of innocence, unaware that his mother's past was trying to steal his future. "He can't take him," she whispered. "I won't let him touch our baby." Christopher's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "He won't. I promise. You don't understand. Marcus doesn't want Michael because he loves him. He wants him because he knows it's the one way to hurt me that would actually work. And now that he knows about your money—" "Our money," Christopher corrected quietly. She leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his steady heartbeat. "He's claiming I was still legally married to him when Michael was born. Says that makes him the father automatically in some states. Were you?" The question hung in the air like smoke from fire they couldn't put out. "I thought the divorce was final. I signed papers. But Marcus always knew how to work the system. If he found some legal loophole." Christopher turned her around to face him. "Look at me." Those gray eyes that had once been cold as winter now burned with protective fury. "I don't care if he has papers from the Supreme Court. That's our son sleeping in there. You carried him, you birthed him, you nearly died, bringing him into this world. No piece of paper is going to change that. Have you ever had someone from your past try to destroy your future? What did you do when everything you built was threatened? Share your story below." That night, they made love with desperate hunger, as if their bodies could create armor against the storm heading their way. Christopher's mouth traced every inch of her skin like he was memorizing her, his hands holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Whatever happens," he whispered against her throat, "we face it together." But the next morning brought news that would test that promise in ways neither of them expected. The DNA results were in. DNA doesn't lie, but it can reveal truths that change everything you thought you knew about love and timing. The courthouse steps felt like climbing Mount Everest in high heels. News cameras surrounded them like hungry wolves, reporters shouting questions that cut through the morning air like knives. Is it true Marcus Webb is the biological father? Will you fight for custody, Mr. Langford? How does it feel to raise another man's child? Christopher's hand tightened on Danielle's as they pushed through the crowd. His other arm cradled Michael against his chest like a shield, their son's gray eyes peeking out from beneath a tiny blue hat. Inside the courtroom, Marcus Webb sat with his lawyer, looking like he'd already won. He'd cleaned up since his doorman appearance. Pressed suit, fresh haircut, the kind of smile that fooled people who didn't know what his hands could do. When he looked at Danielle, she saw the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had her trapped again. Judge Morrison called the court to order, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We're here to determine paternity in the case of Webb versus Brooks Langford." The clerk read the DNA results in a voice that might as well have been announcing the weather. In the matter of paternity testing for the minor child Michael James Brooks, the tested male Marcus Timothy Webb is excluded as the biological father. The probability of paternity is 0%. Danielle's knees nearly buckled with relief. But the clerk wasn't finished. Additional testing confirms that Christopher David Langford is the biological father with a probability of 99.97%. Marcus Webb's face went from confident to confused to furious in 3 seconds flat. His lawyer whispered frantically in his ear, but the damage was done. Judge Morrison looked over her glasses at the assembled crowd. "Mr. Webb, do you have any legal standing to claim custody of this child?" Your Honor, I was married to. Were you legally married to Ms. Brooks when this child was conceived? Marcus's lawyer shuffled papers desperately. Your Honor, we need time to... That's a no. The judge's gavel came down like thunder. Case dismissed. Mr. Webb, you have no claim to this child. And if you continue to harass this family, I'll hold you in contempt faster than you can blink. What's the sweetest victory you've ever experienced? When did standing up for yourself pay off better than you ever imagined? Drop a celebration emoji below. Outside the courthouse, Christopher lifted Danielle off her feet and spun her around like they were in a movie. Photographers captured every moment, but for once, she didn't care about the cameras. It's over, she laughed against his mouth as he kissed her breathless. It's really over. That night, they celebrated in ways that would have made those tabloid writers blush. Christopher worshipped her body like she was a goddess, his mouth and hands showing her exactly how much she meant to him. But as they lay tangled in post-celebration bliss, he whispered something that made her heart stop. There's one more surprise waiting at home tomorrow. She expected celebration champagne. Instead, she found a nursery that looked like dreams painted on walls. The penthouse felt different when they walked through the door. Lighter somehow, like winning in court, had lifted a weight from the very walls. Michael gurgled happily in his carrier, completely unaware that he'd just legally become Christopher Langford's son in every way that mattered. Close your eyes, Christopher said, his hands covering her face from behind. If this is some kinky thing, I should warn you I'm exhausted from. Just trust me. He guided her down the hallway toward what used to be his home office. The door creaked open, and when his hands fell away, Danielle gasped so loud she woke the baby. The room had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. Soft yellow walls glowed with hand-painted murals of Atlanta peach trees growing alongside Manhattan skyscrapers. The ceiling looked like a twilight sky, complete with twinkling LED stars that pulsed gently like a heartbeat. A custom crib sat in the center, carved from rich mahogany with their initials intertwined on the headboard. Matching changing table, rocking chair, toy chest. Everything a baby could need and several things he probably didn't, but that would make his parents smile. How long have you been planning this? She whispered, afraid to speak too loud in case it all disappeared. Since the day I walked into that hospital and saw him. I knew he'd need a room that felt like home no matter where we were. She turned in his arms, tears streaming down her face. This is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever done for me. For us, he corrected, the same way he always did. They put Michael in his new crib for the first time, watching him stretch his tiny arms like he was claiming his territory. The LED stars reflected in his gray eyes, his father's eyes, and Danielle felt something shift inside her chest. Peace. For the first time in years, real peace. What does coming home mean to you? When did you finally find the place where you belonged? Tell me about that moment. Later that night, Christopher showed her exactly how much this new chapter meant to him. His hands traced her body like he was reading a love letter written in skin, his mouth following paths that led to gasps and whispered prayers. They moved together with the rhythm of two people who'd found their forever, bodies speaking languages that courtrooms and newspapers could never understand. As they lay in the afterglow, Danielle's hand drifted to her stomach out of habit. But something felt different, fuller, more sensitive. Christopher noticed her stillness. What is it? She thought about the nausea that had been plaguing her for weeks. The exhaustion she'd blamed on legal stress. The way her breasts had been tender during their lovemaking. I think, she said quietly, we might need to make that nursery a little bigger. 2 years later, she stood in the same penthouse where he'd once fired her, but this time, she owned half of everything, including his heart. The marble floors now bore the cheerful chaos of family life. Toy trucks scattered between designer furniture. Finger paintings hung next to million-dollar artwork. The cold museum Christopher once called home had become something warm and alive. Michael, now a sturdy 2-year-old, chased his 6-month-old sister Emma around the living room with the determination of a tiny tornado. She crawled after him, giggling in a way that made adults forget about bills and deadlines and everything else that didn't matter. Dada. Michael shouted when Christopher walked through the door, still wearing his business suit, but grinning like he'd won the lottery. There's my boy. Christopher scooped him up, spinning him around until both of them were dizzy and laughing. Where's Mama? Kitchen. Michael pointed with the confidence of someone who owned the place, which technically he did. Danielle stood at the counter making bottles for Emma, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow looked more elegant than any professional styling. She wore yoga pants and one of Christopher's old shirts, but she never looked more beautiful to him. 2 years of marriage had softened her edges without dulling her strength. She commanded boardrooms now as easily as she once commanded laundry rooms. The scared girl who'd been fired from this very kitchen had become a woman who co-owned 3 hotels and a charity foundation. "How was your day?" she asked as he kissed her neck from behind. "Better now." His hands settled on her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "The Atlanta property closed. Your mother's going to love having a hotel in her backyard." Danielle smiled. She's going to love having somewhere fancy to take her church friends even more. They watched their children play, content in the chaos they'd created together. Emma pulled herself up on the coffee table, took 3 wobbly steps, and promptly sat down hard on her diaper cushion bottom. "Did you see that?" Christopher was already reaching for his phone. She walked. Emma walked. "She's been doing that all week. You just missed it because you were in Chicago. I'm never leaving again. Cancel all my business trips. I refuse to miss another milestone." Danielle laughed, the sound filling the penthouse with warmth. "You said that when Michael said his first word, and I meant it then too. So what would you do if someone who hurt you became the person who healed you? Would you take the risk? Would you choose love over safety? Tell me what you would have done in her place." That evening, after the children were asleep and the toys were picked up, Christopher found Danielle on their bedroom balcony looking out at the Manhattan skyline that had once seemed so intimidating. "Penny, for your thoughts." She leaned into his embrace, his arms wrapping around her like they were made to fit together. "I was thinking about that night you fired me. How sure I was that my life was over. Worst decision I ever made. Best thing that ever happened to me." She turned in his arms, her hands sliding up his chest to rest against his heart. "If you hadn't fired me, I would have kept working for you forever, loving you from a distance, never brave enough to believe I deserved more. You deserved everything. I deserved you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and full of promises they'd already kept. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. "I love you, Danielle Langford. I love you too." They made love that night with the tenderness of 2 people who'd fought for their happiness and won. Christopher's hands worshipped her body like she was precious art, his mouth whispering promises against her skin that no one else would ever hear. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets that cost more than her first apartment's rent, Danielle smiled up at the ceiling. "What are you thinking about now?" Christopher asked, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare shoulder. "How funny life is. 2 years ago, I was your maid. Now I'm your wife, your business partner, your equal in every way that matters. You were always my equal. I was just too stupid to see it." "Well," she said, rolling over to kiss his chest, "good thing you're a fast learner." Outside their window, Manhattan sparkled with possibilities. Inside their home, 2 children slept safely in their beds. And in their bedroom, 2 hearts beat in rhythm. Proof that sometimes the best love stories start with the worst beginnings. If this story of second chances and hidden strength touched your heart, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about love that transforms, forgiveness that heals, and the courage it takes to rewrite your ending. Como olvido? What's the greatest risk you've taken for love? And remember, sometimes the person who breaks you is the only one who knows how to put you back together.